Today I'm going to show you how to create a 3D beating heart based on 4D CT data in 3D Slicer, and we're also going to use Blender as well. So the first thing you need is 3D Slicer. I would recommend getting the latest stable version. I'm using 5.2.2 here. There's a couple of extensions that you're going to need after you install it. So let's go to the extension manager right here, and you're going to need Total Segmentator and the sequence registration extensions. And so these I already have installed, so that's why they're under this Manage Extensions tab. If you don't have them installed, then you would go under Install Extensions, and then you can search for them here. And after you install them, you'll have to restart the software to make sure that the extensions are all properly installed. If you have any issues with the Total Segmentator, then you should go to the Slicer discourse and check out the threads that are already there. I had a little bit of an issue installing it when I downloaded 5.2.2, and so that thread is there, and I'll provide links as well. It's good to just see if somebody else has had the same problems as you before you do a post, and you might be able to fix it. So once you have everything installed, we're just going to use the a sample cardiac sequence data set that's already loaded in 3D Slicer. So we're going to click this button here to download sample data, and we're going to scroll down, and we're going to get this one right here, the very last one that says CT cardio sequence. And that loaded pretty fast. And you'll see the volume is here, CT volume, but remember it's 4D, so there's actually multiple volumes. So let's hit play up here in the cardiac sequence browser. So now I can see the animation playing through. There are 10 frames, 0 through 9. And there's a YouTube video from Perk Labs that, again, I'll provide a link for it, on how to segment the heart using tools within Slicer's segment editor, and how to use the sequence registration to get segmentations for basically each of these frames. But we're going to use the Total Segmentator so that we can, so it's faster, basically. So let's do a search for it. Total Segmentator, switch to module. We don't need to do anything except click apply. You're going to get this message if you have less than 7 gigs of GPU memory, but because it's a very small data set, it actually works just fine. And you don't need, at least for me it does. So you can try it out. If it doesn't work for you, then you can try the fast mode, but I'm just going to say no because I know this works. And you can watch the progress here. And this is also the area where any errors might get thrown up as well if you have any issues with the extension. There we go. And you see that the segmentation has loaded. And you know, it's not perfect, but that's a whole lot faster. This says here it was 57 seconds. So it was a lot faster than, you know, trying to use the segment editor and manually trying to segment all of these parts. So let's click Show 3D. If you don't see the model, you just click this little centering button right here. There it is. And you can see that everything that's in the view of the volume was segmented. So we want to get rid of some of these parts. I should also say, so I had my sequence browser here set to frame 5, and so that's what got sequenced. And if you slide through the other frames, then you can see how the segmentation doesn't line up, and so that's why we're going to use the sequence registration next. But first, let's go to data. Well, actually, I'm going to show you, in case you wanted to do any more editing or you use Total Segmentator for other things, I'll go to the segment editor and just show you that that's where it is. So it works just like segment editor does for anything else. So you can toggle visibility here. I'm turning off everything that's not heart. There we go. Now we just have heart parts, and this is under frame 5. So now I'm going to go to data. And this just shows you again, it's just all the segmentation. So you can see the visibility and everything that we set is also here. So next we're going to go to sequence registration because we want to get the segmentations for each of the frames in our cardiac sequence. So let's do a search for sequence. Okay, and I just click create new sequence, create new sequence. That's fine. For this, our fixed frame is the one that we generated with the Total Segmentator. So that's frame 5. And we want to do all the frames from 0 to 9. And we want the transform direction to go from fixed frame to moving frames. And then we just click register and just wait for that. It really doesn't take that long. And you can see here in the progress, you know, what it's at. It's at the 3rd volume. Okay, it's all finished. So now let's go back to data. And we see our sequence segmentation here. And we see this output volume transforms. It's on frame 5, which is what we're on right here. So what we want to do is right click right here on this little transform icon next to our segmentation and just put it on output transforms, which is currently frame 5. And let's just slide through here. I'll show you frame by frame. We're on frame 0. There you go. Make sure all of these are switched to frame 0. If you hover over the little transform icon right here, then it shows you that it's on frame 0. And we can slide through. Next frame. That's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. We can also just hit play. So you can see it go through. There we go. So that's really cool. But now, how are we going to get these out of 3D Slicer? So if you wanted to display this someplace else on Sketchfab or anywhere else, you need to get the 3D models out of Slicer, otherwise you just have a video. So we're going to click on one of these models, just right click one of the models that's visible, and we want to say export visible segments to models, because we don't want all of these other models. And so you're going to see them down here. This is a folder, and it has a list of all those heart models that we left visible up here under segmentations. And again, check the little transform, output transform, it says frame 0, so that's good. So now from here, we can just right click on the model names and say export to file. And we're going to change the format to PLY. And I have a folder on my desktop. there. And because this is frame 0, I'm going to add a 0. Oops. Onto the name, and we want to apply transforms and say export and do the same thing. This part gets a little bit tedious, but it makes everything else so much easier. At least the file name is already there. Just have to add a number. Export. Okay. So now we want to go to the next frame. Frame 1. This gets, I find that this can be a little bit finicky. This still says frame 1. I mean frame 0. There it goes. Now it's at frame 1. Everything's at frame 1. Yes. These models, they're at frame 1. Okay, so we can go through and export these again. Add a 1. These are frame 1. I'm not going to go through all 9 of these. You'll have to do that yourself, but I want to get at least 2 sets of these so I can show you what they look like in external software. Almost there. Okay. So these are the first couple of models that I exported, and I'm just going to grab a few of these. Just grab here left atrium, left ventricle, and I mean you can already see, and this is MeshLab, by the way. If you don't have it, it's free. Everything I'm using is free. We can expand this little layer dialog here, and let's just look at the left atrium. You can tell that it's different, but let's go ahead and give it a different color. Come down here, click this little solid cylinder, and this little double click the little gray box and just pick a color. There we go. So now our left atrium from frame 0 is a different color from 1, and you can see that the meshes are different. We can even I'll make this one a wireframe view so you can kind of see through it. If I zoom in. So you can see that the mesh is different. But if you look down here at the bottom where you get your mesh information, you'll see that they have the same number of vertices and the same number of faces. And the order of the vertices is also the same when you use that sequence registration and export these models from 3D Slicer. So that makes the animation in Blender much easier. So now I'm just going to pause the video and go through. I'm going to get all these exported so that we can have them for the next part for the animation in Blender. Okay, so now I have all of the models for all the frames exported. So now I'm going to import them into Blender. I'm just going to do one part at a time to make it easier to keep track of the models. So we're going to go import PLY, and I'm going to find I'm just going to grab the aorta frames 0 through 9, import. Whatever. Okay, you can see we've got overlapping meshes here. And that looks pretty good. Okay, so the next thing we're going to do is I'm going to select the frame 0, and we're going to go over here under Object Data Properties, and we're going to be working right here in this Shape Keys little area here. So first thing we want to do is hit the plus to add a shape key, and that's going to be, the very first one is the basis. So aorta 0 is our basis. And so next we want to join all the rest of these frames to frame 0 so that we can simply have one mesh that just slides through the shapes of those other frames. So have aorta 0 selected, hold shift, and then click on 9, aorta 9. So now they're all selected, but if you look over here under your data properties, you can see that aorta 0 is the first one. So that's where this next step is going to be applied. It's going to be applied to aorta 0. So next we click this little arrow in the shape key area, and we're going to say join as shapes. And then you'll see all this whole list kind of expanded for each here. So now let's go and hide the other shapes. Click back to aorta 0 so we can see in order to change the value of these other shapes, you need to click on one of them, so aorta 1, and let's change this value right here to 1. And it changed shape. It was kind of subtle, but if we switch to making aorta 1 visible, then you can see that they're exactly the same, which is what we want. So now in order to animate this, we're going to have to add some keyframes, and we can keyframe these shape changes. So that's what makes this really cool, and then you can export the whole thing. So let's change this value back down to 0. Now we're getting ready to start animating. Remember from 3D Slicer that this was 10 frames per second, and if we go over here to output properties and look under frame rate for the animation, we don't have 10, so I'm just going to pick a multiple of that and go with 30. And then I'll just space the frames, I'll do 3 frames apart. Okay, so for the first frame, we just want to have our aorta 0 selected. Make sure you have you're in timeline down here for a second tab. And then we're just going to click I on the keyboard. And I'm going to select location, rotation, and scale to add a keyframe at frame 1, and that's with the shape of frame 0. So now I'm going to move down to the next, which is 4. We add 3, right? So this won't get us exactly to 30, but pretty close. So for the next frame, we want to have the shape of 1. So we're going to click on aorta 1, and we're going to change this value to 1. And then we're going to click this little dot right here. It says animate the property. Click that, and then look over here on your timeline. Now you have a frame there. So if we drag this little blue line from 0, well, we need it to be 0 here. So let's go back and change aorta 1 to 0 at the beginning. Again, click the little dot. There we go. And you can see it slowly going from shape 0 to shape 1. So now let's move over to 7. And we want aorta 1 to become a 0. And we're going to keyframe that. and we want aorta 2 to become 1. So change the value to 1 and keyframe that. Again, we can kind of go backwards through here. We want aorta 2 to be 0. I'm always watching my values here. So make sure the values change the way you want over here in the shape keys. Okay, so now we want to move on to the next, which is 10. Again, we want the shape of aorta 2 to be 0. So we'll change that to 0 and click Animate the property. Then we'll click on aorta 3, change that value to 1, animate the property. And back at 7, we want 3 to be 0. So just change that. I will say I'm not an expert on doing this. So there might be an easier way to do some of these things than what I'm doing, but I just always kind of scrub backwards and forwards and make sure things are kind of doing what I want. So this next one, we want aorta 3 to be 0, 4 to become 1. Because there's definitely, you know, more complicated things you can do with changing how, basically how the transition happens. But we don't need to do that for this. You just need to make sure the shapes are popping up at the right place. Next is 16. Again, this may seem a little bit tedious, but it's not as tedious as what you have to do if your meshes are not like registered to each other. then you have a lot more tedious process to try to get one shape to transform into the shapes of the others of the following frames. We're at 19, so this becomes 0, and 6 becomes 1. Back here, 6 needs to be at 0. Remember the math. 6 is 0 here, and 7 is 1. Almost there. 5. Let's go back. That's the last one, 28. 9 is 1. Okay. So I'm going to set this to end at 28, since that's what we're ending at. And I'm going to bring this back to 0. And I'm going to hit play and zoom back out. So you can see how nice that looks. And again, I just like to go through and double check my values to make sure I have the values for the shape key set correctly. At this point, or you know, before this, I should have saved it. I should have saved my project. Right here, I'll just call it heart. Sequence, save. And once you have all your shape keys joined properly and everything's working, you can go ahead and delete all of these others, 1 through 9, because their shapes are saved into aorta 0. So I'm just going to click, hold shift and select all of these, right click and delete. And you see this little squiggle next to aorta 0 means that it's animated, that mesh is animated. And so you can see that. So next, then, it's just a matter of importing the rest of the parts and doing the same thing. So I'm just going to go in order here. Import all of those. And I'll just quickly show you this. If you want to, you can hide the aorta to make it a little bit easier. Remember, we click on heart 0 and add a shape key, which is the basis. And then you want to hold shift, click on 9 so that they're all selected, but with heart 0 selected first. Click this little drop down and say join as shapes. Okay, and then now we can hide all of these others. And click on heart 0, make sure that's the one you have selected. Click I to keyframe this very first shape. Move along to frame 4. Change the value of heart 1 to 1. And we want it to be 0 at the first frame, at frame 0. So change that to 0. And just keep going on along, just like we did for the aorta, and do all the parts. And I'll come back and show you all the parts completed. All the parts of the heart. And you can see I've got all of my frame 0s here, and they're all animated. And I've made them all visible. And I'm going to hit play. And now you can see that everything's working. Everything looks good. So for to finish up, you could just add a material if you want, or like a vertex color. So there's a couple of ways to do that. If you want to add a material, hit this little material properties, and you can say new, and you can rename this to aorta. And if you liked the colors that were automatically assigned based on the anatomy tables in 3D Slicer, then you can, if you still have that open, then you can click on the models here, aorta, and see this little color square. You can double click on that and click that the little color box, and you can get the RGB values here or the hex value right here, and you can just copy that and hit cancel. And then we can click on the base color here under our aorta material, click on hex and just paste in that value. Okay, and I'm going to change this to change the viewport shading to material preview, and you get that color there. Or you can add a texture or whatever else you want to do. But just to make this video a little shorter, I'm just going to show you how to actually get this exported now. So first of all, make sure you have everything saved. If you do anything, just save it. I also like to go and clean up any unused data blocks, and there might be the meshes that you deleted, and just get that all cleaned up out of the file. Hit save again. I hit save a bunch of times. If you're going to use any external textures and stuff, then I like to go to File, External Data, and say Pack Resources. You can see down here this tiny message that says no new files have been packed. I don't have anything there. So to get this out, I have my cursor in the 3D viewport, and I'm going to click A on my keyboard, and that's going to select all the meshes. And you can see that here. Remember, I deleted all of those extra meshes that we didn't need. So all I have are my frame zeros. And then I'm going to move my mouse cursor down here over the timeline, and I'm going to click A there as well. And then I'm going to say File, Export as FBX, and I'm going to call it Heart Sequence. I'm going to change this path mode to copy and click this little button right here. I'm going to say Selected Objects, and I'm going to select Mesh. We don't have any armatures or anything weird like that. It's just our meshes, right? Over here under Armature, uncheck the box that says Add Leaf Bones. Under Bake Animation, we do want that checked, but open this little tab here to get all these other options. And I uncheck these. You can, you can leave or uncheck the force start, end key, and, keying, whatever, depending on where you're going to go. I usually just leave it and say Export. Once you check to see that your model's exported, mine's right here, FBX file, I'm going to upload it to Sketchfab. Okay, this is finally uploaded. I'm going to go Edit 3D Settings. Okay, here it is. Usually the static pose is what loads first. If you go down here to the bottom, then you can change it to scene. And you can play around with the speed if you want to slow it down. But we had it set right at about 1 second for the cycle. You can see I didn't add materials to these other parts of the heart, so or just whatever. Just showing you how it works. And you can change your background color and all of that, change the field of view, but that's it. And I'll just finish by showing you the cardiac sequence that I have up on Sketchfab. And I just applied the colors that were defaulted in 3D Slicer, and then just played around with some of the tools in Sketchfab to adjust the materials like the glossiness and all of that. And so I hope you're able to follow along with that and make your own animated hearts if you get access to some 4D CT data, and let me know if this works out for you. Thanks.